Hello and welcome to the arcade. I just got done with my 5th playthrough of Dark Souls Remastered, and man, I just love this game. There's something really special about Dark Souls and the other games by From Software that really resonates with me. But that wasn't always the case. You see, I actually got Demon Souls for Christmas back in 2009. I tried it out for a few hours, but I was almost instantly overwhelmed by the depth, the complexity, and the difficulty. I didn't really get through very much of the game, but even back then, I had kind of an appreciation for it. I knew she wasn't like the other games, but seriously, I knew there was something unique about Demon Souls. But unfortunately for me, I just wasn't ready or willing or able to give the game time to grow on me. I moved on to other PS3 games, and of course continued playing my PS2, my Wii, and my PC games. It was a weird feeling, like even though I barely played the game at all, I still felt this strange connection to it. I was glad that I played it, even though it was only for a few hours, and I still remember that feeling of playing it for the first time.
Now, that weird connection to Demon Souls for some reason made me really resistant to Dark Souls. I can't tell you why, I just had this loyalty to Demon Souls, so for some reason when Dark Souls came out, I was really annoyed. I was like, why isn't it Demon Souls 2? They're just copying the original and being really dumb and uninspired. Why did I think this, you ask? I have no idea. Literally no clue. But anyways, I did eventually get around to playing Dark Souls, and funny enough, still have never gone back to Demon Souls. But my true love for the Souls games developed when I played Elden Ring in early 2023. That's what really started me on this path. The path that eventually led me to finding my new favorite game of all time. Elden Ring was amazing, and that first playthrough was an experience that I will never forget. Bloodborne was a similar experience and something that I will always treasure. And then Dark Souls 3 showed me how polished the Souls games could be. But then I finally made it to Dark Souls Remastered on PS4. And I did something very similar to what I did with Demon Souls. I played through the tutorial and maybe another hour or two, but then I put it down for a while. But after a couple months, I was getting the itch to play another Souls game, and I tried to play Elden Ring again. But for some reason that day, it kept crashing on my PC, so I figured let me go back to Dark Souls for a bit. But this time, I used a couple of YouTube tutorials on where to go and how to find powerful equipment early in the game, and I'm really glad I did that. Because I think that's what gave me the push to get through the opening areas and get to the point where I could venture forth on my own with no guides. And I blazed through the game in a short 23 hours. I just fell in love so quickly after beating the Bell Gargoyles that I had no choice. I knew then that Dark Souls was my new favorite game. That rush of adrenaline, that sense of satisfaction from beating a boss and discovering a new area, that sense of adventure when exploring somewhere new, and that tension that builds the longer it takes to find the next bonfire. All these elements added up to the greatest gaming experience I have ever had. There is simply nothing else quite like Dark Souls 1 and that first time you play it and beat it. Now, what do I love so much about Dark Souls? Firstly, the atmosphere of the game. At first glance, it might look like your standard high fantasy medieval setting. There's ancient castles, skeleton-infested graveyards, lush forests, and dark catacombs. But when you look a little bit closer, you can see that this is mostly an illusion. The setting of Lordran starts to feel like a complete facade, something that only exists in a memory. That illusion all starts to fall apart the closer you look and the closer you get to the end of the game. And you can feel it in almost every scene. There's a beauty to the game world, but also an underlying sense of foreboding, of something lurking just outside the edge of your vision. The further you progress downward into the depths beneath Lordran, and the further you progress towards the final boss, the more you see what the world is truly like beneath the surface. Like it could all fall apart at any moment. The world of Dark Souls really feels like a dream. And of course, I also love the challenge of the gameplay and the bosses. When I was younger, I would play every game on the easiest difficulty I could, and if it didn't have an easy mode, I would use cheat codes to make myself either super powerful or just invincible. It took me a long time to get out of that habit while playing video games. In fact, it wasn't really until playing Elden Ring that I understood why challenging video games are the most rewarding. The more effort you put into something, the more satisfaction you feel when coming out of it. Even if you don't win or gain any huge external reward, that internal reward to yourself of perseverance is worth more than anything else. And that's something that Dark Souls taught me about difficulty in video games. You see, there is no way to lose the game of Dark Souls. There is no real punishment for failing. In fact, there is literally not even a game over screen. You cannot lose Dark Souls, or any of the Souls games really. You have unlimited attempts to continue on and keep pushing forward, to keep fighting until you succeed. The game may be tough to get through or hard to learn or understand at first, but once you get it, once you realize that the idea of perseverance is the key, that is when you win. That's when you gain the knowledge, the strength, and the understanding to keep fighting until you've made your way through the game. And of course, there is always an in-game reward that correlates to the level of challenge that you face. The tougher bosses grant more souls as currency when defeated, and the bonfires that are harder to reach present you with an easier location to restart from when you inevitably die again. So the game comes across as many would describe it, hard but fair. And there certainly are ways to make it easier on yourself too. When you approach the game with patience, without rushing towards enemies, without panicking and spamming the dodge button, you are typically rewarded with enemies that are more cooperative and more predictable. There's a lot of enemies in the game that I believe have input reading, so they essentially know when you're panicking based on what buttons you press, and they will take advantage of that. But once you understand that, it can make combat a lot more slow-paced and methodical and a lot less chaotic and unpredictable. There's also a line of weapons that makes the game easier, with the caveat of which starting class you choose and what your playstyle is like. But if you can manage to find any of the Black Knight weapons early on, then level up your strength to be able to wield them, you will be able to blast your way through the first few areas and bosses pretty easily. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that for anyone who wants to play with intelligence, faith, or dexterity, but for any strength or tank builds, it can feel like a huge head start to what your final character will eventually become. And regardless of how you approach the game, whether you try to make things easier on yourself, or you just go into everything blind, or you just keep banging your head against the wall until it breaks, inevitably you will feel that incredible sense of satisfaction when you beat your first boss. And that is probably the biggest reason why I love Dark Souls so much. It's that reward you receive for pushing through no matter how hard it gets. For me, the Asylum Demon doesn't really count, although it does provide a small taste of what's to come. It doesn't compare to that feeling of beating the Bell Gargoyles for the first time. That's when that sense of accomplishment, that addicting adrenaline rush, and that satisfaction of things coming together finally kicks in, at least to me. And for each new area you find, each new boss you encounter, that sense of accomplishment for finally beating them grows and grows. Now, Dark Souls is one of those games that, even while writing this script, I get the urge to turn the game on and start playing again. I feel like the games that do this to me are always the ones that are the most immersive. The level of immersion you feel in the world of Dark Souls is unmatched in more ways than one. And I feel like this has a lot to do with the way that the world map and the levels are designed. But it also has a lot to do with the sense of discovery and the tension you feel during exploration. You feel immersed in the world because every choice you make matters. Every decision you make has a tangible repercussion, and most of them are immediate. Even though the game can feel overpowering and even gloomy at times, you feel like your decisions have a real weight and impact on the way that the game plays out. For example, maybe you just beat a really tough boss and you're eager to move on and find the next bonfire so you can level up your character and save your progress. But you don't know where the next bonfire is, and it's not guaranteed to be just on the other side of the boss arena. So, do you risk all of the new souls you just acquired from this tough fight? Or do you backtrack all the way through the area you just came through to find the last bonfire you saved at? The game is really good at giving you that freedom right from the beginning, letting you wield that power to play the way you want, to explore the way you want. New players might have a harder time going through the catacombs before going through the undead burg, but once you've played through the game a couple of times and once you see how all things are connected, you yourself gain a huge connection to the game because of how well everything is in sync. That first time you experience the aha moment, when the area you finish exploring loops right back to the Firelink Shrine, that's when it clicks. That's when you fully realize the brilliance of the world and map design of this game. It's hard to put into words, but if you play this game for yourself, you'll know it when you see it. And then once you feel that connection with the game, it's one that is really hard to let go of. As soon as I beat this game for the first time, I started it right back up again. That's how much I wanted to hang on to that feeling that the game gives me. And the way the ending is set up actually makes it really easy to just jump right back in. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, especially not at first. This game can take some getting used to and will definitely have most people feeling frustrated for a good bit of their playthrough. But in my opinion, there's nothing unfair about the game. Aside from any glitches, anytime you die in the game, you can almost always chalk it up to a simple mistake. Whether you underestimated an enemy's strength or speed, or whether you lost your patience and tried to force your way through a tough area or tough boss. All this frustration can be avoided if you take the time to step back and assess the situation from the point of view of what really is the best way to approach this. What can I learn from this that will make my time easier? I'll give you an example of one of the most hated bosses in the game, Bed of Chaos. The Bed of Chaos is a gimmick boss that requires you to target 3 specific weak points in order to win, rather than a standard fight where you run in, hit the boss, dodge, use items, learn attack patterns, and so on and so on. But if you take a step back and look at it from a different perspective, you'll realize that Bed of Chaos is not a boss at all. Sure, it has a name and a health bar, but it's not a fight. What the Bed of Chaos actually is a puzzle. It's a puzzle in a room full of traps. Ignore the health bar and the name at the bottom of the screen because they don't matter. And in my opinion, when you look at it this way, Bed of Chaos is actually way more tolerable as an encounter in the game. Sure, it may not be most people's idea of fun, and it's certainly no one's idea of a good boss, but I think it is a fantastic puzzle that requires analytical and strategic thinking, perseverance and consistency, and quick thinking and reflexes. I think I've mentioned before how Elden Ring and Dark Souls made me appreciate difficulty in video games. That sense of accomplishment and satisfaction is just so much better when you have to overcome something truly challenging. And that is not exclusive to the games made by From Software. Now when I play any game, whether it's another action game, a shooter, a strategy game, I now either attempt them on the hardest difficulty or the one that the developers intended as how the game was meant to be played. When the game is harder, it typically forces you to interact with more of its mechanics, and for the most part, I believe that the more you experience of a game, the better it is overall. Most games are made with love, care, and passion, and I would say that there aren't many systems built into a game that should be thrown away without a second thought. Dark Souls has also made me more appreciative of exploration and world building in video games. There's almost no point in Dark Souls where you aren't rewarded for exploring a little bit further. There are so many secrets, so many twists and turns in the different areas, and there's almost always something of value to find no matter where you go. And the more places you do go, the more of this hugely varied world you get to see. And this world is amazing. My favorite part has to be the Firelink Shrine, mainly because of how many of the other areas connect back to it, but I also love the Darkroot Garden, Anne Orlando, and the Crystal Cave. They all have an air of mystery to them that makes them all such a joy to experience. One of the greatest things that this game does is leave a lot to the imagination. Each new area is named, but they are rarely explained by anything like cutscenes or in-game dialogue. There are some dialogue lines and some item descriptions that will help you understand the world and its areas more fully, but for the most part, there's a huge sense of true exploration because of how little is known or explained to the player.
Now, before we get to the end of the video, I want to take you on my personal journey through Dark Souls. This is the way I most recently experienced the game and my personal favorite way to play through it. There is a lot that I'll miss, as you can't really experience everything the game has to offer in a single playthrough. But I have played through the game a few times in this general order, and for me it's been the most fun. Although you can't really go wrong no matter how you choose to play Dark Souls.
For my most recent playthrough of Dark Souls, I built a warrior character and focused on the stats of strength, endurance, and vitality. I selected the Master Key as my gift. First, I went through the Undead Asylum, talked to the other undead there to get the Estus flasks, and then defeated the Asylum demon to escape. Then I ran past all the skeletons in the graveyard to get to the Zweihander, then back to the bonfire to level up and save my progress. Next, I took the shortcut through the Valley of Drakes to the Darkroot Garden to kill the Black Knight for souls and a Titanite chunk, and to get the Grass Crest shield. If you can get a Black Knight weapon here, this will most likely be a really easy way to get started with a strength-focused character. His drops are random though, so don't always expect him to give you a weapon. Then I went back to the Firelink Shrine and made my way through the intended first area of the game, the Undead Burg, killing the Taurus demon along the way. Then I made my way up through the Undead Parish and fought the Bell Gargoyles on top of the tower and rang the first Bell of Awakening. Then I backtracked a little bit and battled the Moonlight Butterfly in the Darkroot Garden. After that, I made my way through Blight Town to face Quelaag. Since I chose the Master Key as my starting gift, I was able to enter through the intended exit of Blight Town for a little bit of an easier way to navigate the nasty mire and poison swamps that so many players dread. Next, I battled Ceaseless Discharge to obtain the gold-hemmed set and drain the lake of lava from the bottom of the demon ruins. Then I made my way back to the Undead Parish and through Sen's fortress to fight the Iron Golem. Once I defeated the Golem and touched the glowing ring that he dropped, the gargoyles transported me to Anor Londo, where I explored the beautiful castle before facing Dragonslayer Ornstein and Executioner Smo in what I would consider the toughest fight of the game. If you get stuck at this fight, don't be afraid to change your weapons, armor, or tactics to make it through. Now, once you defeat Ornstein and Smo, you're able to use the Lord Vessel, which allows you to warp to and from some select bonfires. So I went back to the Demon Ruins to face the Demon Fire Sage. I trudged even further down the ruins and defeated the Centipede Demon to unlock the path to Lost Izalith, where I encountered the first of the four lords, the dreaded Bed of Chaos. Then, after warping back to Anor Londo, I made my way up through the Duke's archives to face Seath the Scaleless for the first time. After I died, I escaped from the prison, then made my way back through the archives and into the Crystal Cave to fight Seath the Scaleless yet again, for real this time. Before moving on to the next lord, I decided to avenge the murder of the Firekeeper of the Firelink Shrine. So I used the Black Eye Orb to invade the world of Lautrec, and defeated him to relight the bonfire of the Firelink Shrine. Then I encountered and defeated Patches while puzzling out the entrance to the Tomb of the Giants. Pinwheel was the next boss that I faced, taking him down on my very first attempt, which is admittedly not that hard to do. Then it was on to Gravelord Nito near the bottom of the tombs. Then I decided to go back and fight Havel to obtain his ring so I could gain a boost to my available item equip load in order to wield more powerful weapons and wear heavy armor at the same time. Although I'm not really sure how much I ended up utilizing that. Next, in order to obtain the Ring of Abyss Walking, I took the back entrance to fight Great Grey Wolf Sif. After that, it was down through the New Londo ruins to battle the Four Kings before reaching the Kiln of the First Flame and facing the legendary Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. The final boss fight against Gwyn is one of the most emotional experiences I have ever had in a game. It's the perfect culmination of everything the game has presented you with and taught you to that point. The run up to and the boss arena itself is dripping with atmosphere, with some of the most striking visuals I have ever seen in any game. You start by kindling the Lord Vessel with the four Lord Souls. Then the flames ignite and the gate opens, revealing a brilliant white light and a layer of fog and mist. Emerging through the fog, you see the ghostly figures of the soldiers of Gwyn, seemingly traveling through time and memory. Beyond the staircase, you see an ashen, ruined city that surely at one time was the most beautiful city ever created. As you make your way through the ruins, you encounter several of the most powerful regular enemies, the Silver Knights of Gwyn, as they attempt to stop you from reaching their precious lord. Then you touch the fog wall and enter the dwelling of the Lord of Cinder himself. Gwyn immediately lunges at you and attacks with a ferocity not shown by most other bosses in the game. His attacks are fast and powerful, and he mixes slashes and thrusts with his flaming greatsword with powerful grab attacks that explode in a ball of fire. But if you get up close to him, you'll notice something. There appears to be a hollowness, a sadness to his eyes. And this melancholic scene is further amplified by the score that plays during the fight. The mournful and desperate piano provides a striking contrast to the intensity of the fight and Gwyn himself. It needs no words or bombastic orchestration to convey the tragic fall from grace that Gwyn must have experienced at some point before being confined to this empty room all alone, forgotten and abandoned. The difficulty of this fight can put the patience of many to the test, but if you're able to learn to parry his attacks, or if you're able to utilize patience and precise timing, you'll eventually defeat him, and then the choice presents itself. You can link the first flame and continue the Age of Fire, repeating the cycle that has continued for generations. Or you can leave Gwyn's chamber and begin the Age of Dark. The fight is not just a test of your skills, but also a thematic representation of the game's exploration of sacrifice, decay, and the cyclical nature of existence.
This game taught me so much, but I think the main thing that I'll take away is not only a new favorite game and newfound love for challenging video games, but a beautiful reflection on what it means to be human, what it means to live, and what it means to pursue meaning in the face of life's many difficult challenges. I think in the end, Dark Souls wants you to win. It wants you to overcome the most difficult things that you possibly can. It wants you to be able to stand there at the end and reflect on how much you've grown. It wants you to keep pushing through for as long as you possibly can. And with all that being said, I would love to hear your Dark Souls story. Have you played Dark Souls or any of the other games by From Software? And what do you think makes these games so special? And until next time, thank you so much for watching.